Tears of the Kingdom feels as beautiful as it does hollow. Yet, at the same time, when recounting these past 3 weeks, hollow feels like a dishonest descriptor. I cannot remember or even fathom a game that evoked more excitement in me at its outset. However, I can also recall multiple games that I enjoyed far more thoroughly than Tears. The game is currently being heralded in a similar vein to Breath of the Wild. People adore Tears of the Kingdom. Regardless, I cannot shake this feeling of conflict within me, but every time I choose to admit that fact, it's almost as if the feeling attempts to deny itself. Within the recreational free time that you, yourself, are currently making use of, I'd like to describe to you, A, why I did not enjoy Tears of the Kingdom as much as I wanted to, B, why Tears of the Kingdom is one of the greatest games of all time, and C, how I reconciled those two conflicting views. Thank you very much for clicking on this video, and let's begin. As I'm sure all of us are aware, the anticipation for Tears of the Kingdom was beyond immense.
The birth of his new world.
Yes!
Dating back as far as summer 2019, fans had been relentlessly theorizing, analyzing, and discussing the game. Which only makes sense. Breath of the Wild is the best-selling Zelda game ever. It single-handedly propelled the series to new heights of popularity, and is considered by many to be a modern masterpiece. So naturally, those who adored Breath of the Wild would be expecting its sequel to be a borderline religious experience. This fact, combined with Nintendo's painfully scarce marketing, seriously, Tears of the Kingdom had an embarrassingly minimalistic campaign. Only really left fans with two things: what they knew, and their imaginations. You see, when you practically drip feed your fan base new morsels of content, many of which barely promise anything specific, it'd be reasonable to assume there would be some division during release. We waited 6 years for this game, and we were only presented with its core mechanics stated in an explicit manner 2 months before release. I cannot begin to explain how asinine of a decision this was. Rule of thumb, do not advertise your game to the public unless you can adequately represent the bulk of your game. Nintendo's main mistake was being too vague at the outset. Zonai technology is a spectacular and groundbreaking mechanic, but introducing it in full 2 months before release provided fans with far too little time to fully understand and accept it. The best and most honest way to brew hype for a game is to get your fan base excited for what the game is, not necessarily what it could be. I'm aware that criticizing the game's marketing seems irrelevant at the current moment, but the concept I just explained will be vital to understanding my perspective on the game. I genuinely don't think we'll ever see a Zelda game more highly anticipated than Tears was within our lifetimes. And when the time came, I could hardly regulate myself.
6 years. 6 year wait. Just waiting for the clock. Here we go.
It was genuinely magical. I was absolutely ecstatic. Every little thing, from the improved cutscenes and voice acting, to the nearly inexhaustible dialogue displayed when talking to Zelda, to even the mere prospect of viewing this game outside of a trailer. I cannot understate how giddy I was throughout the entire experience. Seeing Zelda discuss the imprisoning war, hearing the ominous tones draw closer as we approached the body, and most importantly, hearing Ganondorf literally say the name Rauru.
Placed his faith in you.
I was shocked. I sat through the entire following sequence slack-jawed. For those of you unaware, Rauru is the name of the Sage of Light in Ocarina of Time. My favorite game of all time, and what many consider to be a contender for the best Legend of Zelda title. I have never experienced more hype than in that moment alone. This is it. They were referencing Ocarina of Time. Finally, Zelda was explicitly acknowledging my favorite game for the first time in years. Or at least relating Ocarina's events to this game's. Before I knew it, Zelda had disappeared, the hand had caught me by the wrist, and I was awakening in the Garden of Time. Absolutely wonderful title sequence, by the way. Didn't quite reach the same heights Breath of the Wild did, but what it lacks in scope, it makes up for in adrenaline. The Great Sky Island, in essence, functions as a new and improved Great Plateau. Fit with a new, serene aesthetic, intriguing and unique enemies, plenty of opportunities to try your hand at some new abilities, and a main landmark that suspiciously shares the name of another famous sanctuary you're likely to know. While I was taking in and enjoying all the beautiful scenery, I was unaware that the next cutscene would be the main source of this video's thesis.
That door will open only to those with sufficient power. I'm sorry. I did not intend to startle you. It was I that spoke to you earlier. That arm originally belonged to me. I am Raru.
This cutscene was the most disappointing moment of the game for me. Raru was simply a reference, a nod to a previous game. The name had nearly nothing to do with the actual character. I'm aware it's just an Easter egg, but I couldn't help but feel betrayed by Nintendo. They should have known what old fans would have assumed when deciding to literally name-drop Raru. It's not a bad cutscene, not by any means, but after years of allowing my mind to construct an idealistic concept of what this game would be, it was the first step toward truly accepting that this game was not created to fulfill my wishes alone. I continued on regardless, intrigued by who this new Zonai figure was. Before long, I discovered my first shrine. I'm kind of conflicted about them returning, but I'll elaborate more on that later. Disregarding functionality, these shrines have exquisite design. The mysterious Zonai spiral spewing forth from the stone, the way the interiors literally seem to exist within another dimension. Zelda tubers are gonna go crazy with that. The way the statues at the end of each shrine foreshadow two of the most important figures. I'm a big fan of this aesthetic. I'll discuss the individual abilities later on. This segment was primarily dedicated to my beginning impressions. The Great Sky Island truly is an improved Great Plateau. More intriguing architecture, abilities that allow you to interact with the environment around you, and a truly breathtaking aesthetic. After completing all of the shrines, talking to Raru one last time, and receiving the recall ability from Zelda, it was finally time to discover how Hyrule had changed. I'm quite honestly not sure where to go from here. Reviewing an open world game, naturally, is quite daunting, as the very nature of the experience is defined by the ability to forge your own path. Although I suppose in that case, there isn't really a wrong answer. Let's just begin. The following segment will be dedicated to analyzing everything in the game that I found notable upon my first playthrough, and expressing my own opinions in regards to it. Tears of the Kingdom, at first glance, doesn't seem terribly different to its predecessor. From the moment you touch ground on Hyrule Field, it's as if you're back in Breath of the Wild. Like, literally, the impression it gives is one of a nearly identical experience. This worried me, as I'm sure it did others. Let me get this out of the way. Anyone arguing that Tears of the Kingdom is lazy for reusing Breath of the Wild's map is foolishly mistaken. In fact, a returning world may actually add even more value to gameplay. You could explore an entirely new world you're unaware of, or you could return to the world the last game had been fleshing out for its entire runtime, providing for layers and layers of lore, quests, and culture, built upon what was already present. Tears of the Kingdom using the previous game's world as a base is precisely what allowed it to be so massive and intriguing. Rather than fueling their efforts toward creating an entirely new universe, the team was allowed even more time to flesh out mechanics, story, and to continue plots that were left open in Breath of the Wild. And I haven't even begun to mention the fact that there are 2 new layers to your map. Those 2 being the Sky Islands we saw advertised in the trailers, and the Underground. I'm sorry, the what? Yeah, the Underground. The entirety of Hyrule's map has been mirrored to create a monumental cave system, and it was barely advertised. You'll probably end up spending more time in the Underground than the Sky Islands. It is astounding how little Nintendo decided to reveal to us before the game released. Somehow they made me glad that their marketing was so bad, because we had no clue how large the Underground truly was. However, I would argue that the Sky Islands are mechanically and aesthetically superior. What they lack in scale, they make up for in brilliant visual design and distinctiveness. The Underground is enormous and has some pretty fantastic secrets to discover. But by Nehru, the Sky Islands just glow with rich serenity. There is nothing more breathtaking than ascending above the clouds and greeting the pure blue sky, or soaking in the amber sunset as you ride atop your newest invention. Nintendo absolutely outdid themselves with this game's lighting. Breath of the Wild was already a gorgeous game, but Tears of the Kingdom manages to expand upon its forerunner's beauty in a brilliant way. Onto another topic closely related to graphical fidelity, this game's performance is astronomically impressive. Yes, the FPS dips unfortunately low when surrounded by too many enemies or items. That is unfortunate. But seriously take a moment to consider the absolute lack of intrusive loading zones between all 3 layers of the map. I am floored at how well Nintendo handled this game's performance. Considering how graphically and functionally incompetent the Switch is progressively becoming, they did a wonderful job. Tears of the Kingdom's overworld is genuinely remarkable. The old is new, and the new is fresh. All that came before is improved, and all that has been added is enthralling. As you're most likely aware, we've gained 4 new abilities since our last adventure: Fuse, Ultra Hand, Ascend, and Recall. I cannot understate how extensively these new mechanics revitalize and reinvent Breath of the Wild's gameplay loop. For example, Fuse was essentially Nintendo's answer to weapon durability. No, you still can't keep your weapons forever, but the ability to combine any weapon with nearly anything is such a Nintendo thing. They did not take the boring route and just remove durability. It'd ruin the game, and you can find me on that. They created an entirely new system that, while admittedly resulting in some goofy creations visually, prompt the player to strategize even more about which weapons to fuse to which, and what creation will result in the sturdiest and most effective armament. Some will dislike the added stress, and generally abhor durability in general, but I believe Fuse is a marvelous concept that breathes unique new life into combat. Next up is Ultra Hand. Ultra Hand is like taking magnesis and forcing it to sniff copious amounts of creativity. I say that because what we got from Ultra Hand can only be described as an intoxicated experience. Do you understand how unreasonably unlimited this game has become? Ultra Hand will single-handedly ensure Tears of the Kingdom's place as one of the longest-lasting Zelda games. I do not feel the need to exhaustively explain this mechanic. It is the perfect way of promoting creativity. Coming up next is Ascend. Ascend functions as the bridge between incorporating cave systems into the overworld and retaining accessibility. Seriously, exploring caverns without Ascend would not be nearly as enjoyable. Being able to quickly exit an area when faced with a challenge too great to overcome, or simply a mind plagued by distractions, is a small way to remain consistent with the title's open-air philosophy. Accidentally fall down a well with no nearby warp points? Not a problem. Branching even further beyond cave exploration, Ascend is extremely helpful for traversal, regardless of which layer of the map you're operating on. And contrary to first glance, it does not make climbing obsolete. One can only ascend through an object if they're positioned directly below it, meaning there are still plenty of cliffs and mountains that require traditional climbing. Despite being relatively overlooked, Ascend is a genius mechanic. The final main ability is Recall. This is perfect. Lore-wise, Recall is described as the ability to tap into an object's memory and reverse its physical course, which, aside from implying broad sentience across all forms of matter, which is concerning, is an engaging and beautiful way to illustrate the mechanic. I cannot understate how useful Recall is to gameplay. Nearly any object can be rewinded back to a certain point in time. So many traversal roadblocks are immediately solved by the ability to pick an object up, move it toward your desired location, pull it back, and rewind it. It's so distinctive and unique, narratively and mechanically. Certainly my favorite Zonai ability. It also has heavy plot relevance, as we'll learn later on. Those 4 abilities serve to differentiate Tears of the Kingdom from Breath of the Wild immensely. To support the $70 DLC argument in the face of those mechanics alone would be ignorance, most likely born of pre-existing bias. Anyone who has put genuine time into playing this game is aware that the claim that Tears of the Kingdom is functionally DLC for Breath of the Wild disguised as a new game can and has been objectively rebutted. As we're all aware, shrines made their return. I never disliked shrines, but I certainly never preferred them to dungeons. However, this title shrines, in my opinion, do improve upon Breath of the Wild's, simply as a result of Tears of the Kingdom's expanded flexibility and mechanical scope. A fantastic term I saw used to describe this game's puzzle solving was, "There are no wrong answers." Obviously somewhat of a blanket statement, but the point is not that the game is unimaginably easy, but that due to the sheer level of dominion you have over the environment around you, the number of possible solutions to a puzzle increases tenfold. Much like in Breath of the Wild, there are many shrines you'll exit thinking, was that really how I was supposed to do that? And do not mistake that feeling for poor game design. The ability to solve problems in a multitude of ways is wondrously intentional, and is another way the game's mechanics are supplementary to one of its core philosophies, namely, the promotion of overarching player agency. For a moment though, I think it'd be appropriate to take a short break from mechanics and spend some time discussing narrative. Soon after your descent, you'll discover that Hyrule Castle is currently levitating multiple feet above the surface, with crimson gloom spewing forth from the cavity revealed by its ascension. Neighboring establishments have made note of this and intend on researching and investigating the unusual phenomenon. The writer seemingly wanted to reincorporate Link's cultural relevance in the same way it was presented in Breath of the Wild. Both he and Zelda disappear directly after, or in this case, directly before, a traumatic event occurring in the kingdom. Link reawakens, unaware of Zelda's whereabouts, and those he interacts with are relieved or shocked to see him alive. Except in contrast to Breath of the Wild, his cultural impact is no longer a result of an ancient prophecy coming true, but rather a heartwarming recognition of care. Those you meet across the world now acknowledge you as an esteemed member of the kingdom. Not just a hero foretold by legend, but a friend. The most reasonable assumption is that Tears of the Kingdom takes place 3 to 5 years after the events of Breath of the Wild. Strides are being made in establishing new settlements across the kingdom, new Sheikah towers are being built, and the people are slowly building up encampments in the place of ruins, Lookout Landing being the most central of the settlements. Not only this, but many pre-existing establishments have been changed as well. Ateno Village is in the midst of a mayoral election, Zora's Domain has built a statue in recognition of Link's triumph over Vah Ruta, as well as a courtyard made to honor their fallen champion Mipha. Death Mountain, and consequently Goron City's lava, has dried up, or gone missing, I suppose. I'm not sure if dried is the proper descriptor, lava isn't particularly hydrating to my knowledge. Rito Village has been enduring a massive winter storm, and Gerudo Town is literally undergoing the zombie apocalypse. Kakariko took a bit of an L in regards to the newly discovered floating islands. Kato's house has literally been demolished as a result of the falling debris. Also, Paya is chieftain now. I love that. It's such a good way to continue cementing the passage of time. If you're a privacy-invading creep, you can discover her thoughts on the matter by reading her diary found in her room. There are, of course, more communities that have changed since the first game, but those are some of the most relevant. This is the game's active plot, assisting those who need help across Hyrule and discovering more about how to halt the impending scourging of the kingdom. And it is, at the most, competent. Functionally, it's quite good. Being able to reinvent existing areas and provide them with fresh and exciting gameplay is worthy of serious praise. Its relation to the story, however, is where I believe the game made one of its most crucial mistakes. As I mentioned earlier, investigating the upheaval is the active plot. In other words, the story that is currently unfolding. Unfortunately, the far more intriguing and investing story is discovered through a far less engaging means mechanically. Zelda's story is what I'm going to refer to as the preceding plot, or in other words, events that occurred in the past that slowly provide you with context for many narrative elements. The preceding plot is conflicting. Nintendo decided to keep the memory system from Breath of the Wild, a system as genius as it was dissatisfying. The main issue with Breath of the Wild's memories, for many, was that the world depicted in them seemed far more wondrous and enjoyable than the game's actual setting. I believe Tears of the Kingdom unfortunately falls victim to this in the exact same way. The fact that we get to follow Zelda's journey back in time 10,000 years ago is awesome, and is a very intriguing time period to place her in. Problem is, we have no way to experience that world firsthand. We only ever get to see it in the form of flashbacks. This was disappointing. Imagine how fun it'd be to literally take control of Zelda as a playable character when discovering the Dragon's Tears. They are meant to be her memories, right? So why do we perceive them as silent observers? Wouldn't it make more sense, mechanically and narratively, to play as Zelda in those scenarios? I would have adored to be able to experience some bite-sized, linear segments in which the player takes control of Zelda. It doesn't even necessarily have to be investing gameplay. Just the ability to walk around ancient Hyrule Castle, to converse with Hyrule's natives and discover how much the culture has changed. It is a sorely missed opportunity. Despite how dissatisfied I was with the way we view the memories, the story being told through them is genuinely good. Zelda meeting Rauru and Sonia, the first king and queen of Hyrule, is perfect for her character. Zelda's mother died when she was young, and her father was too preoccupied with the state of his kingdom to ever be emotionally present for her. Zelda's interactions with the ancient couple are genuinely heartwarming. She seems taken aback by Sonia's immediate hospitality and kindness. She hasn't had a mother figure for so long. Having her grown relationship with these two characters was brilliant. The way they represent something Zelda never truly had serves to heighten the emotional impact when she eventually loses both of them. Also, can we take a moment to talk about these two's designs? They gave Sonia one of the most unique and well-done character designs in the game, and made Rauru the most physically disproportionate organism to walk the earth. It makes me uncomfortable. Don't get me wrong, the top half is very well done, intriguing, timely, and unique. But Nintendo, please give your characters longer legs, I beg of you. The preceding plot seems to be a vastly altered retelling of Ocarina of Time's story. Ganondorf, leader of the Gerudo, swears allegiance to the King of Hyrule falsely. Zelda senses Ganondorf's impure intent, and he eventually betrays the royal family's trust, taking control of the kingdom in the process, which eventually leads to his impermanent sealing, carried out by multiple sages from across the land. The script is adequate. It's not particularly great, but it isn't quite bad. The dialogue is good at best and subpar at worst. I'm far more intrigued by the nature of the plot itself. Disregarding the paradoxical tendencies of time travel, the story is investing. Moments such as Sonia's death and Ganondorf's subsequent rise to power are genuinely emotional. Even seeing Rauru mourning at Sonia's grave for a mere moment pulled at my heartstrings a little bit. Seriously, I cannot understate how amazing it would have been to be able to actually engage in these scenes. Sneaking around the castle as Zelda to prepare for Ganondorf's attempted assassination, or assisting Rauru in driving back the Molduga forces. Nintendo could have even given Zelda a more powerful recall mechanic to make use of in bite-sized, streamlined segments. But I digress. The most impactful moment in the preceding plot is undoubtedly Zelda's decision to become an immortal dragon. Sacrificing her whole self to ensure the safety of her kingdom, as her memories escape her in the form of tears scattered across the land. The preceding plot's goal is to explain and emphasize A, where Zelda is currently, and B, the immense sacrifice she made for her kingdom. Returning to the game's opening segment with this knowledge is so poetic. The Light Dragon, or Zelda, is one of the first things you see upon exiting the beginning island. Genuinely beautiful. Zelda's story, despite being told in an imperfect manner, is certainly this game's narrative highlight. Don't get me wrong though, the active plot is not bad. I just wish more of Zelda's story was discovered through it, as on its own, it's nothing groundbreaking. However, I would like to state that Tulin is the most perfect character in the entire game, and you can fight me on that. I love him. He's so scrunkly. Similar to Breath of the Wild, you're tasked with uncovering what kind of trouble is currently facing each main race in Hyrule, with the game encouraging you to assist the Rito first. The quests you complete to gain access to each main dungeon are usually pretty standard, bordering on fetchy at times. But I'd argue that most of the characters make it worth the trouble. Assisting Tulin in retrieving his bow is harmless and wholesome, demolishing rubble with Yunobo is actually kinda fun, defending Gerudo Town from Gibdos with Riju is actually awesome and certainly my favorite segment, and uncovering how to enter the Water Temple with Sidon it's okay. All of these quests lead up to the 4 main dungeons: the Wind Temple, the Fire Temple, the Lightning Temple, and the Water Temple. My personal ranking goes as follows. Number 4. The Water Temple. The Water Temple, while aesthetically pleasing, was relatively standard. Still an enjoyable challenge, but definitely not as good as the other 3. Its boss was also relatively lackluster. If you haven't played the game yet, I actually suggest doing the Water Temple first. It will only go uphill from there. Number 3 is the Fire Temple. The Fire Temple is massive. Its main minecart mechanic is interesting, and its setting is quite grandiose. It's mostly just bogged down by Yunobo. Yeah, whoever plays Yunobo got pretty shafted in terms of dialogue. He does his best, don't get me wrong. The character's lack of appeal isn't his fault at all. I just dislike that the writers felt the need to make him say Goro at the end of every sentence. Regardless of Yunobo, the Fire Temple is pretty awesome, with an enjoyable boss to boot. Number 2 is the Wind Temple. I adore the Wind Temple. The buildup as you strategically scale the floating pillars, bounce off of floating airships, and eventually plunge into the dungeon is just spectacular. Its aesthetic and setting as well is just gorgeously distinct. And holy expletive! Don't get me started on the final boss battle. Easily the best dungeon boss. It has one of my favorite themes in the entire game. Listen to this! That's the Dragon Roost Island melody. Number 1 is the Lightning Temple. The Lightning Temple was simply the one I found the most mechanically engaging. The electricity currents are wonderful puzzles to overcome, and the old, dusty, ancient setting is very reminiscent of Arbiter's Grounds. Queen Gibdo is a spectacular boss fight as well. Not quite as enthralling as the Wind Temple sequence overall, but I certainly had more fun solving this temple's puzzles. Tears of the Kingdom approached dungeons pretty intelligently. They made the wise choice of reintroducing individually themed dungeons while still including the terminal system from the Divine Beasts. What results is a great mesh of old and new, providing for superior atmosphere without sacrificing the open-air approach to puzzle solving Breath of the Wild introduced. The ability to solve any of the 5 puzzles in any order you want is yet another way to entwine Tears of the Kingdom's obsession with player agency into its dungeons. But I suppose I'm still yet to touch upon the game's central expression of choice, the Zonai Tech. Zonai technology was an extremely surprising and borderline disquieting addition when it was first announced. Some were excited to build their own creations and explore Hyrule the way they wanted to, while others were concerned it was drifting too far from what Zelda should thematically be. I was in the latter camp. I didn't abhor the idea, but I was certainly skeptical. I'm happy to say, I am officially a supporter of the mechanic. Tears of the Kingdom has managed to prove that gameplay always takes precedent, regardless of how well the aesthetic fits into the world, which I don't believe to be an issue. Zonai Tech is an ingenious addition to Link's toolset. Understandably, in previous titles, you'd encounter a puzzle, examine your surroundings, and attempt to discover the answer to the puzzle. In Tears of the Kingdom, oftentimes, you'll encounter a puzzle, examine your surroundings, and create the solution. The possibilities are so limitless, it's breathtaking. I hope you're beginning to see how impressively this game interweaves its main philosophy into every single little aspect of gameplay. Nintendo has created a masterfully cohesive piece of art. So, what's the problem? Where is the flaw? Why didn't I fully enjoy this masterpiece of game design? What you expect from a game directly affects your enjoyment of it. Obviously. If you carry a preconceived notion of what the game should be, and the game does not meet those expectations, you will unfortunately not be able to enjoy it to the fullest. I believe that is the main mistake I made with Tears of the Kingdom. I have over 200 hours in this video game, and I beat the main story at around 80 hours in. Around a week before the game had officially released, I had received a comment on my most recent video. It read, "Zelda goes back in time and becomes a dragon." At that point in time, I had no clue what that meant, but I knew it must have been important. It absolutely was. One of the most enthralling plot twists in the franchise was permanently stolen from me. The dread of getting even more spoiled prompted me to finish the game's main story as fast as possible, so as to avoid any main story spoilers. I didn't want the same thing to happen again. Didn't want the game I had been waiting for since I was 10 years old to be ruined even further. So, I did it. I beat the game within 80 hours, and I regret it. Don't get me wrong, the ending is so marvelous that I don't believe I can properly express its brilliance through words. Or at the very least, I couldn't do it justice. But my mistake was rushing it. I unfortunately can no longer experience that ending for the first time, and by the time it was over, I felt that I would have enjoyed it far more had I waited. I believe rushing through the main story somewhat desensitized me to how brilliant the game was. I found myself not fully satisfied with the main story, despite it being one of the most amazing and interesting in the series. And I really think that's a result of how I decided to approach it. When you perceive the journey as an obstacle to overcome rather than an experience to savor, you ruin the game for yourself. Unfortunately, that issue was heightened by the fact that I was essentially treating the game as if that was how you were meant to play it. Going from place to place, dungeon to dungeon, eager to beat the main story. I was almost playing it like I'd played, say, Twilight Princess or Ocarina of Time. That isn't to say I didn't make use of its open world elements, but I shouldn't have rushed to the end so fast. I was kind of upset that it wasn't what I wanted it to be. It wasn't this epic, perfectly planned out linear adventure with like 100 main dungeons and a traditional story. It was the sequel to Breath of the Wild, meant primarily to be experienced and secondarily conquered. So to those of you watching, I urge you, please tell your friends to take it slow. Tell them to soak in everything they can about this game before they conclude its narrative. Doing so could very likely heighten their enjoyment of this game. The sooner you truly begin accepting a game for what it is rather than what it isn't, the sooner your appreciation for that game will grow. I genuinely believe Tears of the Kingdom is one of the greatest games ever made. It deserves a higher score than Breath of the Wild mechanically by a long shot. Breath of the Wild may have the benefit of nostalgia, but Tears objectively iterates upon and improves its mechanics far too much to be rated lower than its predecessor. From the story, to the gameplay, to the music, to the artistry, it is a miracle of a video game. And I suggest you treat it as such, by savoring the experience, convincing your friends to play it, and just allowing yourself to enjoy it for what it is, rather than what it isn't. Take it slow, friends. Remember to stop and smell the flowers.